I don't want to return. The other day that I was cautioning you about the way you spoke and on the issue of corruption in the judiciary, and I have a feeling that when I speak it tonight, you will be laughing at me. You were grinning when I called you earlier to invite you on this program about what you said, and I was cautioning you. But because you're a member of the bar, you probably understand how far-reaching some of these issues are. Were you shocked by what Justice Dati just said?
No, sir.
So in all what Justice Dati just said, how bad do you think are? Was he able to speak to the extent of the kind of corruption you think exists in the judiciary? I mean, if there is corruption in the judiciary, thinking that it's even at the highest level of the holiest of the holies of Nigerian judiciary, the apex court, the Supreme Court, where we all bow to as the last hope of the masses.
Now, Sean, if I may, let me remind you, or remind all of us, or those who are watching, when he retired from the Supreme Court in 2004, that's nearly 20 years ago, the Honorable Justice Samson Owaifo, who is still alive, had complained that in the 70s and 80s, allegations of judicial corruption were confined to the magistracy, and that by the 90s, it had appeared to have climbed up to the High Court. And by the time he was retiring, he was afraid that it had got to the appellate level. He also said something else, that at the time he was leaving, people who did not present with the intellectual capabilities for success at the legal profession were being appointed to the judiciary at the High Court. And he feared that these inadequate people were going to rise to the cream of the appellate court system in a short time. In 2011, if you may remember, the story broke. Two stories, actually. One was the quarrel between the then president of the Court of Appeal and the then Chief Justice over allegations that the then Chief Justice sought to instruct the Court of Appeal as to how to decide the case relating to the dispute relating to the governorship election then in Sokoto State. That ultimately led to the firing of the president of the Court of Appeal, and the Chief Justice then retired under a cloud. In that same year, the then Speaker of the House of Representatives was credited in a cable transmitted by the American ambassador then of having told the American ambassador that the Supreme Court collected money to decide the appeal in respect of the 2007 presidential election. I'm not making this up. All of this is in writing. All of this is evidenced in writing. So I'm just telling you I'm giving you a tale of the tape. And so what the Honorable Justice Datijo Muhammad talked about basically reflects a trend that has itself been fully documented, and the timeline has been reflected in the history of remarks by retiring justices of the Supreme Court over the past 20 years.
Now, I like to say this with all sense of modesty and all sense of loyalty and also sense of patriotism, that the courts are hallowed in every sense of the word, and the courts are indeed the last hope of the common man. That's where you can run for cover if you have any issue. In fact, any arms of God, the arms of government, they have issues, they go to the court for settlement. Without the court, our society will be in trouble, in chaos. But then, if this kind of thing is happening, and the kind of expose that we've seen about some corrupt judges, which some of their colleagues or some members of the bar have said, and some kind of insinuation and inference that have come up about corrupt judges, because there are corruption in every aspect of our lives, not only in Nigeria, but everywhere. But where you do not want to hear that the corruption exists is in the courtroom. How do we deal with this?
Well, first of all, we deal with it by acknowledging it honestly. And I do not agree with you in the spirit of honesty that Nigerian courts today are the last hope of the common man or woman. If you had said the courts should be the last hope of the common person, I would agree.
Are things are bad, Prof?
Are they today the
are
last
things are
hope
bad?
of the
Is it that our
yes,
courts
sir.
not? We're not able to rely on our courts? Are things so bad within the bench?
Yes, they are. I'm not going to come here to lie to you. The courts should be the last hope of the common person. I will agree with you. Are Nigerian courts today the last hope of the common person? No, sir. We cannot be honest with ourselves if we cannot admit that the Chief Justice swearing in his son as High Court, appointing his son and swearing him in is a problem. We cannot be honest if we don't agree that the President of the Court of Appeal, sitting in the NJC, approving appointment for her son-in-law and approving appointment for the daughter is a problem. The least they can do is that when these things come up, they recuse themselves. Okay? That is the least they can do. Because being a judge is not a family inheritance. Being a judge is not a sexually transmitted condition. Husbands don't inseminate their wives with judgeships. Men don't inseminate their mistresses with judgeships in the bedroom. I am sorry. We have to be brutal with ourselves. This has got too far. And every time I say this, I get abused. But I'm going to insist on keep saying it because the stakes are too high. The issues are too important. Ordinary people are being ruined by this. And we cannot continue to pretend as if we don't know that this is a problem. Now we are hearing it from the judges themselves. So it's not rabble-rousers like me saying this anymore. And saying, now, I started saying this over nearly 25 years ago. I quarreled with Justice Ebo because at that point, for those whose memories go that far back, Justice Ebo, I kept pressing on his case and on his neck until he was retired compulsorily. But that was the beginning of the problem. Now we have an epidemic. And yes, it has got up to the Supreme Court. And we have to acknowledge that if you have a judicial system in which judges of the Supreme Court are saying that the Supreme Court is itself in a problem, then you have a credibility crisis. It can no longer be described as the last hope of the common man. We have to address it.
So now, I'm hoping to understand where are we going to start from. Are there still good men in our society that can serve in the bench today? And where do we find them?
There are good men and there are good women. Yes. Those good men and good women are not confined to the sons and daughters and wives and husbands and mistresses of sitting judges and politicians. That is the problem. Look around and see. The 17 senior advocates in Kogi State today are asking that appointments to the bench be suspended because the state governor, they allege, wants to make his wife a high court judge. Right? That is how bad it has got. Every senior politician wants the person who is in their bedroom or in their family to become a high court judge. How do you run a country like that? So that honest people no longer even get a chance to be considered. And people who are decent and successful and bright and intelligent with integrity no longer have a chance to be considered. If you don't have people from your family or your political clan running the appointments, that is the problem. And when therefore, the retired Justice of the Supreme Court, most recently retired, says the first thing you do is unbundle the office of the Chief Justice. We have to take that very seriously. The Chief Justice has become, as an institution, I'm not making imputations against the person. As an institution, the Chief Justice has become too dangerous to the country. It's got to be unbundled.
I was reading an article, and there's an excerpt from a professor of law, Agbo Madaki, who said this. He said, law should be interpreted to serve justice. When justice is done according to law, it could lead to injustice because of the imperfections of the law. Professor Agbo Madaki, I mean, that could be a jurisprudential argument in the areas of academics, but there are realities of the imperfections of our law. And I'm wondering, Professor Odinkalu, if you can give us a sense of how bad things are. For example, there are those who say they pay for judgment. There are those who say there are pre-conscripted judgment that are handed over to judges. Are those the case truly? Are these the realities? If you can mention 2 or 3 things, because an average citizen will say, why then do I need to go to court when I will not get justice? But what is justice in itself? When there are issues of technicality, is it allowed in law? If you follow the law and oppose justice, what is justice? What is law? What are those commonly perpetrated evil in the bench that we need to expose tonight?
Look, the NJC, over the 20-year period from 1999 to 2019, the NJC considered just under 1,000 petitions against judges, and the strike rate in terms of success rate was about just under 15%, right, of judges in respect of petitions in respect of which they decided there was a case and there was culpability on the part of the judge. That's actually an extraordinarily high strike rate, given that the NJC is very reluctant to discipline judges. But when you look at the kinds of allegations that were found, in 2005, for instance, you had the case in respect of Senator Ugochukwu concerning Anambra South Senatorial District, where 2 justices of the Court of Appeal were found on record by the NJC to have collected money. In that case, you are talking about one was given 15 million naira in the money then. Another collected 12 million naira. And I can give you their names if you want, because all of this is public record. I'm not making any of this up. Justice Adeniji and Justice Okuchukwu Opene of the Court of Appeal. I should also mention here that of the 3 justices in the case, one of them, Justice Akas, absolutely refused to collect a dime. He declined any importunations. He ruled according to the evidence and the law and became the minority in the case. But you know the good thing? He got up to the Supreme Court because he refused to be corrupted. So let nobody think that I'm here to keep telling stories about corrupt people or corrupt judicial officers. We also have had, and we have evidence of incorruptible judicial officers. The problem now is that they are few and far between, and they don't travel high enough. That is the problem, and we've got to fix that. And we've also got to fix the situation in which the only people who are now getting processed to appointments are the sons and daughters, husbands and wives, and I will continue to insist, mistresses and lovers of sitting judges and sitting politicians. That is the biggest problem. And why is that a problem? Because it is front-loading the corruption. It's no longer buying and selling of judgments. It is that people are now planting their families in corrupt relationship with the judicial system to make sure that down the road, you cannot even get any idea of justice.
It's so sad. But quickly, Prof, there are issues of payment. I mean, Justice Adijo is saying that a registrar of the Supreme Court is earning more than him, who is a judge or justice of the Supreme Court. In some way, imbalance, isn't it? I don't know how RAMFAC or how any agency of government calculated in such a way that the registrar is earning more than the judge of a very senior member of the bench. And another thing is, in fact, the CGN himself is saying there are just 10 judges left, justices of the Supreme Court left. What are we waiting for to appoint justices to the Supreme Court? They are already loaded with work. And I can't remember in the last 2 decades or so when we've had a fully complemented Supreme Court appointment at a time. I mean, there is always a deficit. Where do we go from here?
We have got to reform judicial appointments and reform them fast, very fast, urgently. Now, again, this is about politicians and their interests. In 2008, Justice Ogebe, who presided over the presidential petition, was quickly moved up to the Supreme Court. Decent man, honest man, great judicial record, but it set a bad precedent. And increasingly, judges who sit on presidential petitions are now moved up to the Supreme Court, which again builds into the system perverse incentives. And it is these perverse incentives that we have got to eliminate. The perverse incentives that appear to make it possible. Now, you're talking about how registrar of the Supreme Court earns more than justices. But the same registrars of the Supreme Court want to become judges and go to the High Court and then start climbing up. If that is not a perverse incentive, I don't know what is. Why would they want to become judges if they are earning more than the justices of the Supreme Court?
Well, again, there are South, South, Southeast. They are not represented. That's one of the things Justice Datijo also said. And he said that it portends bad for our judiciary.
Now, the Sarkin Lafia, Justice Chidi resigned from the Supreme Court to become Sarkin Lafia in 2019. He has not been replaced nearly 5 years later, over 4 years later. What kind of system do we have? I can tell you the story of how it is that he has not been replaced, but we don't have the time here for it because the details are there for anyone who is interested in following judicial appointments in Nigeria. But the point is that we shouldn't be there. We should have a quick enough system. And partly, I've got to regrettably say this is institutional laziness on the part of President Buhari, because there is no way you can have a situation in which in 2019, vacancies existed in the Supreme Court. 4 years later, after he left, those same vacancies still exist. He must take personal responsibility for his failure in this. We've got to call him out for his failure in ensuring that those appointments were made.
Just in about 30 seconds, Prof, to wrap up. The judicial reforms, I think most of it will fall on the table of the Attorney General of the Federation and the Minister of Justice. And the appointor is the President of the Federation, who will make suggestions to the CJN. Do you believe and do you think that these men will do right by Nigerians and their true conscience, make sure that our judiciary is rid of the kind of debts that we have wrought that has been described to have been now?
Sure, it's not just men, it's also women. The President of the Court of Appeal is a woman. Her predecessor was a woman. And we have seen with certainly the immediate past President of the Court of Appeal, allegations of improper behavior by her husband under cover of parliamentary immunity. So no gender is safe in this whole thing. We're all messed up, all right? So if we're going to fix this thing, the only thing I can say is that the judiciary is too important to be left to male or female judges alone and politicians. Citizens must take serious interest in what happens in the judiciary. And no, we can no longer abandon it to an incest of politicians and judges. That is what got us into this mess to begin with. We've got to insert citizens into this and insert them in a big way to make sure that we contain the damage that the politicians and the judges and lawyers, Nigerian Bar Association leadership, are doing to our judiciary and administration of justice. Sorry.